Do you ever treat faith like something which is private, something that you only check in on Sundays, but never let run through your weekdays? Notice this, that religion that lives only on Sundays dies within the week. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, what we'll learn is that Moses is going to teach the Shema and the mandate to weave God into family life. And I'll give you one immediate action to start making faith a lived rhythm in your home today. In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, the show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So in this chapter, what do we learn? We see that Moses actually urges Israel to love God fully. This is called the Shema, and it's going to appear from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 5. And its instruction is to keep the commandments in daily life, to teach them faithfully to one's children by talking, binding signs, and writing them on door frames. In fact, Deuteronomy chapter 6 moves obedience out from laws which can seem a bit distant and abstract into family practices and everyday memory work, showing how covenant faith can actually be transmitted across generations. Okay, that's the important part. We're going to read the first 3 verses now. The focus here is going to be the call to fear the Lord and keep his statutes. And my question for you to stay engaged is, why does obedience begin with reverent fear instead of casual devotion? Let's read. Verse 1, Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord your God charged me to teach you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you and your children and your children's children may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life, and keep all his decrees and his commandments that I am commanding you, so that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe them diligently, so that it may go well with you, and so that you may multiply greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you. Okay, biblical unlock number 1. Why do we need to start with fear, right? It says, you may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life. Why do we need to start with fear? Well, reverent fear can actually be better described as respectful awe. That is to say, it primes the heart to take these commands seriously. It is not terror, but it is trust. And that is what God commands, which leads to life. The statutes are actually framed as wise paths for flourishing. So fear and obedience are the twin foundations of covenant living. You fear the retribution of your parents. You fear that not because you are terrified, but because you have respect. Okay, now we're going to read verses 4 to 9. This is the Shema. Love God and teach your children, right? So how do we actually teach faith to kids in a distracted culture? Let's read verse 4 to 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, and when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So how do you teach the Shema? The Shema, what is the Shema? It is what we just read. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Okay, now, how do you teach this to a distracted household? The easiest way to think about this, or to make it tangible, is to make it repeated, make it tiny, but you have to be consistent. A short recitation, whether it be in the morning or the evening, a simple explanation for kids. Why do we need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind? And there are physical cues as well, right? So we can see, bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead. The idea here is we need to remember what these things represent. The truth needs to be embedded in rhythm, so belief is learned by doing, not just by being told. Okay, let's read verses 10 to 15 now. This is going to be a warning against forgetfulness and prosperity's danger, or a caution against disobedience. So, why does blessing often become the greatest test of faithfulness? That is the engagement question for this particular section. Let's read. Verse 10. When the Lord your God has brought you into the land that he swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you a land with fine, large cities that you did not build, houses filled with all sorts of goods that you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, and when you have eaten your fill, take care that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The Lord your God, you shall fear him you shall serve, and by his name alone you shall swear. Do not follow other gods, any of the gods of the people who are around you, because the Lord your God who is present with you is a jealous God. The anger of the Lord your God would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you from the face of the earth. So I talked about this concept of a jealous God in Deuteronomy chapter 4. In fact, there's a cross-reference of this jealousy, how the jealousy of the Lord burns like a fire, right, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 24. Now, the idea here is that whilst one can say that jealousy or envy is a sin, and you could make the argument that God is therefore committing a sin here, it's important to recognize the difference between jealousy and envy, or the two senses of jealousy. Envy from a sinful human perspective is, I want what you have, right? But God's jealousy is different. It is a form of covenantal restoration. He says, I love you so much that I will not share you with false idols. That is what we mean when we say jealous, or what God means when he says that I am a jealous God. He will not share you with false idols. It's also interesting that in the book Confessions, written by St. Augustine, he writes in the first section of the book, or the first, it's basically the first page, he writes, You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Right? So we are made for God. We are made to worship God. We are made to come to know God. That is why we are created. That is what our purpose is here on this earth. And in that sense, when we are divided in that purpose, when we are following our own fleshly desires, our money, our wealth, our careers, and things start to take the place of God, that is when things start to go awry, right? So that is why God warns us that when life goes well, right, prosperity can breed forgetfulness and self-sufficiency. And then he says the warning here is actually preventative, right? Because you are going to be blessed. You are going to have everything that you want at a certain time. But are you going to be tempted to credit yourself rather than God? And the remedy here is intentional remembrance, sacrifices of thanks, testimony, and corporate confession, so that you all know, right, that God will not be divided, in the sense that he will not have his undivided worship that is solely for him be divided amongst false idols. Okay, let's read verses 16 to 25. This is going to be catechesis, which is basically teaching. How do you teach? And covenant memory, right? So the question here to stay engaged is, what concrete practices will prevent God from slipping in your life into background noise? Okay, let's read verse 16. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You must diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his decrees and his statutes that he has commanded you. Do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, so that it may go well with you, and so that you may go in and occupy the good land that the Lord your God swore to your ancestors, thrusting out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has promised. When your children ask you in time to come, what is the meaning of the decrees and the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord your God has commanded you? Then you shall say to your children, We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. The Lord displayed before our eyes great and awesome signs and wonders against Egypt, against Pharaoh, and against all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land that he promised on oath to our ancestors. Then the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our lasting good, so as to keep us alive, as is now the case. If we diligently observe this entire commandment before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us, we will be in the right. Final biblical unlock. What exactly are the practical, repeatable steps that work? It's important to teach your children. That's what the Lord says. When your children ask you in time to come, what is the meaning of the decrees and the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord our God has commanded you, you have to say to your children and repeat what God has done for us, what God has done for his people, and how it shows his faithfulness and love for us even till this day. So don't forget this. This is really important. Now, before I go into any more detail about this, I just wanted to point out that this is a really important thing, what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 16. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. Right? Now, there's a little bit of Christological fulfillment in here, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to go through it in the actual section, which is coming up very shortly. But think about where in the New Testament do we see this repeated again? Do not put the Lord your God to the test, right? But the focus about this entire chapter, the focus of this chapter is the Great Commandment. And the Great Commandment is the Shema, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And now, what we're going to see as we go into the New Testament to see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ is going to be a longer section than usual because there's a lot of deep symbolism from Deuteronomy chapter 6 that is going to carry over into the New Testament. So it's really important that we understand this chapter in full. So we read in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4 that we need to hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. So the Lord alone, that is really important. And we read this again in John chapter 17 verse 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 4, right? So in John chapter 17 verse 3 we read, and this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. So the fact that it is specific, it is particular, it is God alone, there is only one God, right? That is a really important theme here. We read it even in 1 Corinthians 8:6, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. Okay, so this is important. Then the Shema, right, the Shema, which we hear again, is repeated. In Matthew chapter 22 verse 37, we read that Jesus said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. In Luke chapter 10 verse 27, we read the same thing. He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So you can see, this is a really important commandment to Jesus. He says that this is the greatest commandment, and that all of the law and the prophets reside or ride on this commandment itself. But the way I want you to look at this chapter, because I think this is the most important thing about Deuteronomy, that Deuteronomy is the book that Jesus quotes when he is tempted by the devil. Okay, this is so important to understand. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is tempted by the devil. In Matthew chapter 4 verse 5, then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Exactly quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 16. So this interaction actually explains various things for us, right? It shows us that, one, the Old Testament is really important. Jesus acted in the way that he did only knowing the Old Testament, right? He used the Old Testament. He quoted from the Old Testament. He loved his Old Testament, so we can't just disregard it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to test. The Lord your God is not some magic genie that you can immediately call upon when you're in trouble. No, the Lord is God, the creator of the universe, and he wants a relationship with you. Okay, let's see how we can apply this chapter in our daily life. The Shema, that's the most important thing about this chapter, the Shema, which is repeated in innumerable occasions in the New Testament, right? So you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. How can we apply this in our life? Well, I think it's important to recite this chapter. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4 to 5. Recite it. Say one sentence and explain it to your friends. Explain, why are we trusting in God today? Pick one verse from Deuteronomy 6 and let that be a household verse, because Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 16 was what Jesus used to combat the devil. He used this verse. He had an intimate knowledge of the Old Testament. When Satan would quote him Psalm chapter 91, he would quote him Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 16. So that's why we're doing this. That's why we're reading the Bible, so that we can actually have the tools to equip ourselves, the sword which the Spirit gives us to deal with the devil. Alright, well that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. Next time we're going to move from loving God at home to what faithful corporate life actually looks like in Deuteronomy chapter 7. We'll unpack unholiness, separation, and how God's covenant people are actually called to distinctiveness in the land. So, in this episode, Deuteronomy chapter 6, we saw that faith must be taught, practiced, and remembered within the family. And it's not just an abstract belief. And if you forgot everything, just remember the Shema. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That is the central hinge that unites both doctrine and daily life all in one. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating the show and following. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.